And joining us now on the debate, Madam Justice Gloria Epstein from the Court of Appeal of Ontario, Lee Akazaki, President of the Ontario Bar Association, Matt Cohen, Director of Litigation Projects with Pro Bono Law Ontario, Judith McCormick, Executive Director of Downtown Legal Services, and Lauren Sawson, Dean of the Osgoode Hall Law School. And it's great to welcome you all here to TVO. Nice to see you all. Thank you. Our 7th or 8th judge on this program, I think you are.
Something like that?
Yeah,
Happy to be here.
We like to have judges on. Okay. Speaking of judges, we get our program ideas from numerous sources, but this one came right from the top judge. Roll tape, please, Michael.
Do we have adequate access to justice? Well, I think the answer is no. We have better access than in many countries, but it is still not what it should be. Among those hardest hit are middle class and poor. We have wonderful justice for corporations, for wealthy, but the middle class and the poor may not be able, in many situations we have found, to access our justice system. They may earn too much for legal aid or have too many assets, but have too little to retain a lawyer at the average billing rate of the last figure I got for 2009 was $338 an hour.
Okay, Lauren Sawson, to you first. When the Chief Justice of the country comes out and gives what I think is a pretty unusual address like that about the access to justice in this country, do we have a crisis in this country?
Look, I think the use of the word crisis is important in this context because you think of it in a medical situation and you can have a chronic or an acute illness. And a chronic illness is one that you've become used to, one that you don't think there's any immediate intervention that can fix. And I don't think we should ever view the denial of access to justice, having legal needs go unmet, as something we can tolerate, something we're used to. And in that sense, I think the most significant part of her speech is the call to action, that the status quo is not tenable, it's not acceptable, and there's something that needs to be done about it. And it's not a call to judges or to lawyers or to any particular group of individuals, it's to us all. And I think this is a problem for the public as well.
We're going to figure out what should be in that call of action, but I still want to get a better sense about whether we're in a situation, Madam Justice Epstein, where we have end justice for all in Ontario, or end access, as we're calling it, end access to all. How bad is it, do you think?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in just a minute, but first I'm going to have to make it clear that I'm speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of the Court of Appeal. The second thing I'm going to say is, against 35-year background in the legal profession and administration of justice, as well as being involved in judicial education here and in other countries, I can say with some degree of confidence that our system of justice is well regarded internationally, perhaps the best regarded in the world. As the Chief Justice just said, we do better than in most countries. Can we do better? Yes. So is there access to justice for all? No. Do we have a perfect system? No. Will we ever have a perfect system? Unlikely, but we certainly have work to do.
I think everybody gets, Judith McCormick, that we're never going to have a perfect system, but is it as good as it could be right now, given the resources that we're putting into it? What do you say?
It's very far from what it should be. I think that a crisis is an accurate way to describe it. We have reams of evidence with respect to unmet legal needs. We have the experience of the legal clinics where 2,000 or 3,000 people a year call asking for legal services and they can't get it. So there's just a tidal wave of unmet legal need out there. And it has disastrous results for people. They forfeit rights, they compromise rights. There's a lot of human misery that's caused by it. They lose their houses, they lose their jobs, sometimes they lose their children in custody disputes. The consequences are stark for a lot of people.
Matt, do you see that wreckage out there in terms of people's lives?
Every day, Steve, I'm on the front line of it. There are thousands of unrepresented litigants who are streaming into PBLO's help centers every day.
PBLO?
Pro Bono Law Ontario. Those help centers operate under the name of Law Help Ontario. Thousands of people every day who are at best bewildered by the effort to navigate a civil justice system on their own when that system was never intended for self-navigation. At worst, they are irritated, they are overwhelmed, and like I say, every single day we see this crisis on an individual level because people are procedurally forced to do things that they're ill-equipped to do, so we have to erect things to help them, and the consequences of them not being able to access these services are dire to their lives.
I want to be careful with the language here, though, Lee, because we hear all the time we've got a healthcare crisis, we've got a social services crisis. The word crisis gets thrown around a lot. Do you want to put it on here?
I think that it's important that we understand what justice is, and we as the representative of the Bar Association representing lawyers, I'd first like to point out that pro bono law means lawyers acting for free, and we do a lot of that. However, I would reckon that the problem that you're referring to is similar to the problem that we have involving food banks. And you've traveled throughout the province, and you've seen the signs in farm country that says, if you've eaten today, thank a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm saying to you
you've eaten today, thank a farmer.
Thank a farmer.
Right.
If you've experienced life in a just society in Ontario, thank a lawyer. Because justice, when we talk about access to justice, every day when we walk outside our door, we experience access to justice. If you are part of a same-sex couple, that is justice that was created through the help of the courts, obviously, but it was lawyers who brought it to the court. If you have an injury for which you receive compensation, you have access to justice. And so justice is something that we experience in our daily lives as Ontarians because we have a great system of justice. Where it breaks down, we, the lawyers, are the first ones to bring it to the public's attention. Why? Because we're the ones who are bringing the public access to justice.
Okay,
and so when it doesn't work, we're concerned.
Let me drill a little deeper with you, Lauren, because you were part of a big, fairly recent province-wide survey on Ontario's civil legal needs. And what did you find were the key access to justice issues that you uncovered in the course of that?
Well, first, and related to that, let me echo what Lee said, but add to it that access to justice may not always mean access to lawyers. And that's one of the insights coming out of that study, as we're looking at all the different needs, and Judith has outlined many of them in consumer settings, in workplace settings, in family law settings. Many of them don't require a lawyer. In fact, the problem you solve by getting people the information they need, by getting early intervention so that small problems don't become huge ones, can be the most effective way to spend resources. So that sense of triage comes loudly and clearly through the report, and endorsing some of what Matt's Law Help Ontario does, where for some people it's not a matter of needing help with every aspect of their case, it's needing someone to guide them through it if they have the resources, capacities to do that. So what we found are those who are seeking lawyers are by and large finding them, and by and large very satisfied with the outcome and the experience.
Want to put a percentage on that?
So of the people who recognized they had a legal problem, 2/3 went to find a private lawyer, paid for the services they received, and were 8 times out of 10 satisfied. The dilemma is when the Department of Justice did a study a few years ago and didn't ask, what did you do with the legal problems of your life? Said, did you have a problem in the workplace? Have you had a problem with a product you bought? Things we know have legal solutions. Then almost 8.5 out of 10 didn't identify that as something they would seek legal assistance for. So it's the things you don't know are legal problems that are the potential miscarriages of justice by neglect. That's, I think, the most serious problem. Once we know it's a legal problem, once we seek out a lawyer, then by and large we have a system, as Justice Epstein said, that works extremely well. But if you're left out, as too many people are, then there are very few resources to go to know where to find help.
Let me follow up, Madam Justice Epstein. If you don't, or I guess what's stopping people, this may seem obvious, but what's stopping people from getting the help or the access that they want?
It's a complex answer to what seems to be a simple question. There are many things, but I would identify the 2 main ones as being money, the ever-present financial burden that litigation or legal services imposes on people, and the second is resistance to change.
What does that mean?
Well, our court system has existed, and forgive me for concentrating on the court system, others can speak to other aspects of the issue, but our court system has been, I'll give you one example that's close to my heart, and that is family law. As chair of the Family Rules Committee and someone who's been involved in family law and interested in it for a very long time, one of my concerns is the fact that we do not have a specialized court. And others hold a different view. In my view, the time has come. The time has long since come where we need to have a specialized family court, and that would be the Unified Family Court throughout Ontario. We've got it partway, which increases the complexity in family law immeasurably. But to have judges who are dedicated to family law, experienced in it, and can take charge of a case from the beginning to end would, in my view, and in the view of many others, increase access to justice in a very critical area of the law that we don't now have.
So I guess the thinking is that divorces and child custody cases have just proliferated so much over the last 35, 40 years that we just need more resources to deal with all that.
Well,
is that it?
Not just that. Of course, that's part of it. But there has been a resistance in some circles to specialization. We used to be called, the Superior Court used to be called the Ontario Court of Justice. Sorry, the Superior Court used to be called the Ontario Court General Division. And General Division, suggesting that we're all generalist judges. And I agree that there are advantages to judges having a general background in law. That said, with increased complexity of the laws and increased specialization of the bar, I think that the public is better served from an access perspective and others if we have a specialized court in certain areas. We've had one on the commercial list for 20 years.
And now it's time for families.
Family started in 1977, moved partway through the province in the Unified Family Court, and stopped. I think it's time to keep going and finish the job.
You all have kind of your own special place on the access to justice continuum, if I can put it that way here, and the judge has given us her sense of where things are from her point of view. Why don't you pick up on that and tell us, you know, from the work you do, how do you see the access to justice not happening either for money reasons or for lack of resources, that kind of thing?
Well, I guess I probably have a slightly different view than Lauren on this topic. We've had many discussions about it. I think that it's very difficult for people to navigate the system without lawyers. We do have a system where, you know, we require lawyers to train for 3 years full-time. We require them to article for 1 year, and then we require them to take licensing exams to be able to practice law. And the idea that, you know, someone off the street who's got a legal problem can get some advice and some coaching and sail ahead is, I think, probably a little optimistic.
Is that what he thinks?
No, I'm setting him up a little bit. But I think that, you know, part of the problem is when we look at the middle class, there's so many different parts of the middle class. There's so many variables in terms of literacy and English proficiency and ability to handle various different situations. But generally speaking, this is a complex area of life. It's a professionalized area of life for a reason. And so the idea that it's a do-it-yourself amateur project is problematic, I think, for the people involved. And I think that they do end up compromising or forfeiting legal rights. I was an adjudicator for 9 years, and I saw people get steamrollered through the process. And you know, typically, I don't know, Gloria, if you see this, but you know, often what will happen is the judge will know what the legal issues are, but not know about the facts. And the unrepresented person won't know to put those facts forward because they won't know that they're relevant.
Are you allowed to call a judge by your first name?
I'm sorry.
No, I didn't know. Maybe you guys know each other so well. That's good. Man, I saw your eyebrows go up halfway through that answer.
I did. I mean, Judith is right that self-help resources are perhaps not for everyone, and that there are some people who are going to use them more successfully than others. And there is merit to the view that the ideal scenario for everyone is to have a lawyer who's going to represent you throughout their case. The reality is that that's just not going to be feasible and is not going to happen anytime soon. I wouldn't want.
How come?
Well, how come? Partly because of money is the biggest reason. Money is the biggest reason. I mean, the marketplace for legal services, and it's not going to change anytime soon, is such that many people are not going to be able to afford lawyers for their entire case.
Let me follow up on that, though, Matt. The rich can always afford lawyers.
Right.
The poor are covered by legal aid, we're told. So it's people in the middle who are not covered here. Is that the idea?
Well, also, the poor are covered for some issues in legal aid. The poor are covered for a lot of criminal matters, for a lot of family matters, for certain niche areas of civil law, such as mental health law and refugee law, some landlord-tenant matters. For general civil non-family litigation, there is nothing. I mean, Legal Aid has recently cut its certificate program for civil cases. So for a lot of civil law, for poor people, there is nothing. There is no real prospect of them hiring lawyers for their case. So what we've got to promote is innovation in the way that legal services are delivered. Part of that is going to be self-help, acknowledging that it may not be for everybody. Part of that is going to be what's known as unbundling legal services, where we promote within the profession the idea that you can provide services for part of a case instead of a whole case. Part of it is engendering the pro bono ethic, but the overall blanket is to tell the profession that you've got to innovate in the way that you provide legal services so that everybody can do their part in providing a measure of
Lauren,
access.
what does that mean? You have to innovate.
So I think innovation is the key, and it comes back to this sense of triage, that there are going to be scarce resources, we know. This is, to the extent it's public money, it's competing with schools and hospitals and all sorts of things. And we also know that money is not well spent in healthcare, for example, if you treat everyone in the ER. If you wait until the problem gets to the most serious stage and then say all we need are hundreds and hundreds of more doctors and surgeons and we'd be fine. Instead, we realize there are all sorts of problems that a well-trained nurse can handle, that medical information can handle, and when you need the resources most, that's when you want to have the best ERs in the world.
What's the corollary for the legal system?
Corollary is, I think, having a wealth of the different points of contact along the way, places to get that advice, ideally with well-trained people and with, for example, at Law Help Ontario with the supervision of a lawyer, so it's not just information and here you go. And then I don't want to lose sight of the most important piece, I think, that Judith mentioned, which is law is complex. Why is it complex? Does it need to be complex? Should we be simplifying it? Should we accept every part of the system should be exactly as it is, and we should simply put more money into getting more lawyers to appear before more judges? And I think there are far better solutions, far better ways to engage in prevention, engage in informal dispute resolution, engage in better legal information for more people so they solve more of their own problems. That's a good thing.
A follow-up from Madam Justice Epstein.
If I may, I think the parallel to the medical system and the legal system that the Law Society has just endorsed and facilitated is paralegals. And
well, then you're going to get Ben mad, though. Excuse me, Lee. You're going to get Lee upset, right?
I don't think, you know...
The lawyers are cool with paralegals now?
No, I don't think he should get upset, be upset. He may quietly be upset, but it sounds a little bit self-serving to really be upset for financial reasons. I mean, it's not about us, it's about the public. Go ahead, Lee.
But if we're looking at the corollary, when nurse practitioners came in, doctors are not happy with that, right? It's cheaper for the system, but it takes money out of doctors' pockets. More work for paralegals means less money for lawyers, doesn't it?
There always has been work for paralegals, and when paralegals weren't regulated, we used to call them people who were impersonating lawyers. And so I'd like to get back to the issue from a lawyer's perspective is not so much paralegals or other people entering the market. We have a problem in allocating legally trained people to the system that we've got. We've got a bottleneck in that we've got the scarce resource in the public court system, and we also have the decline of the Main Street lawyer. We talk about the Bay Street lawyer. A lot of services, in fact, the majority of legal services are provided to Ontarians through the Main Street lawyer, and they're getting older. Older lawyers tend to charge more than younger lawyers. And what do we do about that? Well, I think that the first thing that we need is we need to get the public engaged on the need to invest in the justice system.
Okay, can I come back at you on that?
We
saw the clip. No, I understand, but we saw the clip off the top of Beverly McLaughlin giving her speech at the Monk School. And the man who introduced her that day was the Attorney General of Ontario, who said, Chris Bentley,
That's right.
I've knocked on 30,000 doors. And there's none of those, there's nobody behind any one of those 30,000 doors that he's knocked on as a politician who are saying, could you please raise my taxes so we can spend more on the justice system? It's just not on.
That's absolutely correct. And that is what we have to contend with. That is
so what do you do about it?
Well, I think that it's important that we're having this discussion here, and there has been a lot more discussion about the role of, and I think it's important that we start to talk about the role of lawyers within the justice system, because we have in starting this debate, talked about streamlining the courts, dealing with the rules, perhaps creating a unified family court, which is great. We support that because it provides more expeditious and more rationalized family justice. Let's take a look at how lawyers are created. Lawyers don't come out of nowhere. It is a society that creates lawyers.
And great law schools.
And great law schools. Great law schools which are underfunded at the moment, and as a result, you have more lawyers wanting to practice on Bay Street to pay off their student loans than to practice on Main Street, where the younger lawyers could be used to provide more legal services to the middle class.
Well, let me ask Matt about this. In Ontario, if you want to be a doctor, there's only so much you can charge for a procedure because the government and the Ontario Medical Association come to a fee schedule agreement.
Right.
Should we do that in Ontario with lawyers?
I don't think there would be public appetite for it, Steve. I mean, I think for sure if you surveyed members of the public, people would tell you that lawyers charge too much and that they're priced out of the market. If you then asked them whether lawyers should be forced as a matter of price controls to charge less, I'm not convinced that they would be comfortable with that idea at all. I don't know if Mr. Bentley's door knocking included that question, but if it had, I don't think that people would be too keen on that idea, because then they may start thinking about other industries which perhaps they're a part of, where the ideas of controlling their wages and prices might be
Lauren, any appetite for that?
Well, I was going to say, unless you go about it by using the market mechanisms we do in so many other fields. For example, legal expense insurance. And we see insurance in many fields, pool risk, bring down costs, bring rationing of resources, and providing more access. It may not be the solution for every area, but people are talking much more about it now. It's already a reality in Quebec, and it's here in Ontario in a small form, but the question then becomes public or private insurance for unionized workers,
So
or for all.
Too complicated?
No, I think it needs to have, when we come back to innovation, the partner of innovation is leadership. We need to try things, we need to pilot initiatives, we need to evaluate what works and what doesn't. We didn't get Medicare just by someone in Saskatchewan saying, let's go for it. We tried all sorts of things, many of which failed and many of which succeeded, and then you make the successes sustainable and you grow them. And I think the Unified Family Court's a great example of a pilot initiative. It worked, and now the next step of leadership is expand it, make it universal. And I think that's what you've heard already today.
Judith wanted to say.
Well, I guess wanted to say, in terms of the lawyers that are coming out of law schools, both Lauren and I teach at Osgoode and UT respectively, and we see bright, enthusiastic, energetic law students every day that would love to be doing public interest work, but there aren't jobs in that area. So it's not just a function of the fees that they pay and so forth. The underfunding of the legal aid system also means that there aren't jobs for lawyers in that system as well. So that creates a problem in terms of the work of, I guess, grooming lawyers into that system. But I also agree that I think the legal insurance idea is a bold move, but I think it's time for a bold move. There's so many different sort of entrenched groups here that we do need to see something bolder. I think every option has its risks, but I think we can minimize some of those risks. I don't think it's just any legal insurance scheme. You have to get the right insurance scheme. You have to make sure that you have one that protects poor people as well as middle-class people.
Judith, do you ever watch Yes Minister on TV? Do you know what word politicians hate more than any other?
Yes.
It's when their deputy minister comes in and says, Minister, that's very bold. That's a very bold idea. Yeah, that means it ain't happening.
Bold and innovative here.
I see.
Innovative leadership, not bold.
Yeah.
Madam Justice Epstein.
A couple of things with respect to the financial side. First of all, I think there are ways for us to improve access to justice without costing the government money. And I go back to the Unified Family Court. I'm delighted to hear that Lee and Lauren have both endorsed it, Unified Family Court throughout the province. And in my view, and I haven't personally done the study, but in my view, a good business case could be made that there would actually be financial savings associated with delivering the same services through one court as opposed to three.
So why don't we do it?
Well, let me give you the three reasons I keep hearing, and I say, with respect, hogwash.
Is that a technical legal
It's a very, I could say it in Latin, but I can't remember what it means. But the one is that it would cost too much. I've already addressed that. I think in the end it would cost less. The second is, as I said, the resistance to change from a generalist court to a specialized court. It would involve creating a specialized family law court. And the third is The third is that it would involve both levels of government, the province and the feds. Fine. It involved both levels of government in 1977 when they started the project and got partway through. There are still, to my knowledge, 2 levels of government who would be involved. So quite frankly, I don't buy that. The second thing that's sort of the elephant in the room, but we've talked about it or alluded to it, and that is the way that lawyers charge. And I know that lawyers are in fact, you probably know this, Lee, are in fact looking at other ways to charge for their legal services. And my experience recently, at least, with the colloquium that we've just talked about at the beginning and where Chief Justice McLaughlin spoke, and this opportunity means that we should all get together, various interest groups, including the lawyers, and try to come up with different ways of addressing the problem together.
Lee, you want to tackle that?
I think I would agree that it's important that the public that pays for the legal services understands how lawyers charge their fees. For every lawyer on Bay Street, and I think that it's irrelevant to the present conversation that a lawyer on Bay Street might charge a lot more for services rendered to Air Canada for buying a jet as compared to representing a family in a dispute in family court. But it is relevant that we have an army of lawyers who are working for legal aid, and legal aid is not $338 an hour, it's about $80 an hour. And if you take away the administration costs from that, they're working for approximately the same amount as a computer programmer or a hairstylist, for example. You know, we're not talking about people who are in it for the money, we're talking about people who are committed to providing that access to justice.
The other, if I may, the other critical part of the conversation when we're talking about lawyers' fees is to recognize the extraordinary pro bono ethic that's emerging in the profession. And I think it would be a bit unfair to have a discussion about astronomical legal fees without immediately mentioning the extent to which those lawyers are giving back.
Tell us about that.
Well,
how many do it? What percentage?
The percentage, I know that firms have as a target, some firms have as a target trying to have about 3% of their billable hours, 3% of their billable hours in a year go towards pro bono work.
That doesn't speak to how many lawyers are participating.
I can tell you that on our rosters we've got several hundred lawyers who we can call upon to provide pro bono work. I can tell you that through our in-house programs we've served 11,000 clients, all done by pro bono work from lawyers. Many of whom are coming from Bay Street, many of whom are coming from the highest fee-paying scales in the province. So the appetite is there. I personally don't find it difficult to recruit lawyers to do pro bono work, whether you're a Bay Street associate or a retired partner or a sole practitioner or someone in a more remote area. Anytime that we call them and provide them with the opportunity to do rewarding pro bono work, the answer is yes.
What, 40,000 lawyers in Ontario, roughly? How many of the 40,000 are doing pro bono work at any time during the course of a year?
I can't get to them all.
Anybody know?
I know that I haven't met a lawyer yet who is not doing any pro bono work.
I think that's the issue. In other words, I think you'd find a refreshingly high percentage, and I think it speaks to the issue that there's a deep sense of professionalism. What it doesn't do is address the systemic needs we've been talking about. So the most disturbing fact we found in this survey, this telephone survey, and Veronix did for the Civil Legal Needs Project, was when they were asked, do you think the system, legal system, the justice system, works better for those who have money than those who don't? And if you ask that about the healthcare system, about things that we think shouldn't be determined by the size of your wallet, then that's a message we take to be part of our social contract, part of what it means to be
Lauren,
Canadian.
I don't mean to be cynical here, but if you ask anybody about anything in our society, does it work better for the rich or for the poor? I mean, the answer is yes, of course it does.
But when you're talking about the rule of law, when you're talking about the justice system, I can't think of anything more disturbing than finding 80% of the people who think that something as fundamental as the vindication of their rights, the protection of their obligations and interests is determined by something that has as little to do with the democratic values as how well you're doing in the market.
You don't need to name names here, but do you see in your courtroom on a regular basis the fact that justice is not blind? The rich get better service than those who aren't rich?
Yes. And I would say something else. As I applaud the pro bono work and the pro bono initiative, and the efforts made by legal aid and the efforts made by those who volunteer in the system, but it's really a drop in the bucket. 40,000 lawyers and you hear of a few hundred, and maybe there are a few hundred more than that, but that's, with respect, not very much. The other problem on the other end of the spectrum, as I see it, is cases where, for example, somebody may not have chosen to go into the system, may have been sued because they built a fence too close to the other guy's backyard or whatever it is, and has to spend $50,000 or $60,000 defending an action. I don't know that pro bono lawyers are going to take that one on. And $50,000 or $60,000 in anyone's bank account is a lot of money.
Just help us again with this, though. You didn't hesitate very much when I asked whether the rich get better service in court, and you said yes. How does that manifest itself?
Well, complex legal cases, and we've got a lot of them, require resources for research and gathering evidence and assembling arguments and so forth.
And better lawyers too, I presume.
Yeah. And so sometimes in the Court of Appeal, we'll open a file and we'll see that there's really something there, but it hasn't been well put together. And a lot of times, probably because of the lack of resources. So, and then other times, you'll see a similar issue of importance and it's been beautifully presented. I just think that the chances of the file that's coming forward with all the resources behind it and the big name lawyers has a better chance. That shouldn't be the way it is, and as a member of the Superior Court and then the Court of Appeal, we bend over backwards to try to make sure that disparity in resources does not feed into the result. But there's certain reality to it.
Are you seeing more and more people coming before, not your court necessarily, but the justice system writ large, who don't come with a lawyer?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
That's happening a lot more.
Undoubtedly.
Yes? Why is that happening, Matt?
Primarily because people can't afford lawyers.
They can't afford, so they go in there by themselves.
So they go in there by themselves. And there are thousands of unrepresented litigants every year in the courts of Ontario. And there needs to be resources to help them. Undoubtedly, the resources are not going to rise to the level of senior, competent top counsel, because everybody who has made the point today is right, that you're not going to be able to attract all of those cases you're not going to be able to attract the interest of high-priced lawyers to all of those cases. Having said that, there are plenty of things that you can do to make life a lot easier for those unrepresented litigants, like having a triage model of deciding what kind of services is going to help them. Is it going to be general information? Is it going to be fancy software that's at least going to let them fill in court forms in a way that's professional and dignified? Is it brief summary advice? All sorts of different things that can make life better.
Judith, let me get you on this, because you know the old line, of course, the lawyer who represents himself has got a fool for a client. Is it ever a good thing for somebody to walk into court unrepresented?
Rarely.
Rarely.
Sometimes it's a good thing. It's not always a bad thing. There are times when a judge will, in fact, bend over backward to try and help. But that's problematic for the judges, too. I mean, they're wrestling with a role that doesn't fit the current reality.
That's not supposed to be their responsibility.
That's not supposed to be their responsibility. And what happens when people are unrepresented is that those lawyer functions tend to get uploaded to the judges, and that's, you know, there's tension there between their traditional role. So, I mean, I think part of the innovation is the court reform, and looking at what we can do to make changes there to reflect the reality. But I also think it's really important we don't give up on the idea that people need expert help. I agree with Lauren that we can simplify the law. I think we can make courts and tribunals much more user-friendly, and we should definitely be doing that. I mean, all these things, you know, you need a multi-pronged approach to the problem, but at the same time, we can't, you know, say, well, we've done this and that's fine, and shove them into a system that's adversarial, and let them sink or swim.
Let me try this in our, because we're down to our last few minutes here, and every public opinion poll I've ever seen, when people are asked, what are the issues you care about the most? It's always, you know, way up at the top, it's always jobs and the economy, and there's health care, and, you know, if the economy's doing okay, then maybe you get to the environment, and, you know, taxes. Access to justice is never high on anybody's list.
So can I respond to that?
So, well, the question is, how do you get people interested in all of what we're talking about here?
But here's, I think, the issue is access to justice is one of those things that you think is always an issue that affects other people until it affects you. In the same way that, you know, there are these catastrophic events that happen. You think, you know, if you didn't move into a floodplain, you don't think about floods very often. We get married, we get into relationships, we don't think they're going to break down. We don't plan for that eventuality and all of its devastating consequences. So that's where I think there isn't this constituency out there who next year are going to have a devastating legal problem. And that's why you need to have these mechanisms, the triage, the resources in place.
50% of married couples are projected as
That's right,
separated.
all the other married couples.
That's right, that's right.
That's right, and for a variety of interesting reasons, it tends not to be consumer driven. When you go to a gas station and fill your tank, you know you're going to have to fill it next week and the week after and the week after, so it is very natural for you to advocate for lower gas prices and more convenient gas stations. It is not natural for people to wonder about the next civil dispute that they're going to be involved in and to wonder about the kinds of services that are going to be available. The fact that it's not consumer driven, however, does not mean that we need to, as a profession, abandon the responsibility of coming up with solutions for the people who are going to need it. And that's why the Civil Needs Project was so important. It finally asked people, what kinds of things do you need? The answers were, we need a variety of different ways of providing legal services, and now we gotta get to it.
Well, I want to hear Madam Justice on this, because most people in this province are not going to end up in your courtroom someday. And therefore, they're probably asking themselves right now, why do I need to know about this? Why do I need to care about this?
Well, I can answer that by relating it to the items that you did identify as would be top on the list of the concerns of the public and what Lauren said. For medical care, for jobs, for family matters, inevitably, it is going to touch access to justice is an important component of your ability to enjoy all of those important parts of your life without interference. So if you have a problem with the medical system, or if you get fired from your job, or you are denied access to your child, you need us. And so while the public is identifying those other things, subliminally running through all of those is access to justice.
Now you've done the study. Now you've given them the roadmap. How optimistic are you anything's going to happen?
I have to say, as you heard around my thoughts on rich and poor in the justice system, I have enormous confidence in our values and our aspirations. The statistic I'll leave you with that I think I reflect on the most, the public tends to often have a very dim view of lawyers. But when they're asked, have you ever had a lawyer represent you? Those that say they have an enormously positive sense of the lawyer in their life.
They say that about politicians too. All politicians are idiots, except mine. My MP's okay, but everybody else's is an idiot.
But
right?
I think we need to worry about the ones who never have that experience, whether it's a lawyer or some other service to help them solve their problems. Not getting access to it is what has the greatest cost and what has the greatest potential for
Lee, last
symptoms.
30 seconds
Steve,
to you.
I think you have to go to places where we don't have the just society, where you don't have lawyers and an independent judiciary. You go to those places, Burma, Myanmar, you ask them what their top issue is, and they will say justice is their top issue. You don't find socialized health care or anything else like that as being a top issue. You hear about, I can't get out the door. I can't get out the door without being arrested.
Okay.
That's the justice
We're going to give
issue.
the guy from the Bar Association the last word on this. Can I thank Madam Justice Gloria Epstein from the Court of Appeal of Ontario, Matt Cohen from Pro Bono Law Ontario, Lauren Sawson, the Dean of the Osgoode Hall Law School up at York University, Lee Akazaki from the Ontario Bar Association, and Judith McCormick from the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. It's good to have all of you on the program this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.